mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today on the show, we have a special guest. On the show, I have John Munson. He is a decoy collector, enthusiast, outdoorsman, all things waterfowling. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Katie. Thanks.
Actually, John is here live, which is nice. We have him here from Des Moines. Well, not Des Moines, but Des Moines area.
Very near Des Moines,
yes, coming down. He's here in town, so I get to talk to him live, which is always a treat. So, since, again, you're a new guest to the show, I like to have everyone kind of tell their background and their entrance into the outdoors, hunting, waterfowling, and then, I have to hear your first decoy story. But let's start with just the outdoors in general. So how did you get into the outdoors, waterfowl hunting, and that sort of thing?
Well, I grew up in rural Iowa. My family was hunting and fishing enthusiasts. It just so happened my dad died early in life when I was 11 years old, so we had just gotten a taste of hunting, for instance. Hunting was probably my first priority back then when I was a kid. So that kind of added focus to my life, you might say, that I wanted to do everything, really well for my dad and all that kind of stuff, even after he was gone. So waterfowling, we duck hunted and that kind of thing, but it was never as you hear now or think now about duck hunting with blinds and decoys and stuff. It was all jump shooting on ponds and that kind of stuff. So as I got older in life and increased my repertoire of people that were around me, I ran into duck hunters that actually used boats and blinds, and boy, that was just the cat's meow. So that's kind of how it started. Young in my adult life, I started rubbing shoulders with some of these guys that took me under their wing and so forth, and I really had a passion for waterfowling.
Yeah.
My dad had a shooting jacket that has one. In fact, I have it in my decoy room. It was a shooting jacket that had some patches on it for shooting state level trap and that kind of things, and on the back was the original Ducks Unlimited patch.
Oh, that's awesome.
So Ducks Unlimited.
I've seen this, actually. You sent this to me, yeah.
So Ducks Unlimited was actually something that I wanted to get into. So I just got my a while back, my 40-year committee member pin.
Yeah. Volunteer
committee member pin. So it's been that long ago since I joined. Our whole family is pretty much involved in DU as far as volunteer and that volunteerism, that kind of thing. Cindy and I, my wife, we met, we just celebrated 35 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And our first date was a blind date.
Oh, yeah?
Literally in a duck blind. So my hunting partner at the time, his name was Val Larson, well known in the DU community in Central Iowa. He had 4 children, and all 4 kids, actually had 3 children. All 3 kids, their God-given names on their birth certificates were Drake, Teal, and Woody. So he was my hunting partner for many years until he passed away. But Cindy and his wife were good friends, and so he needed help with these girls, in the middle of the night and putting out decoys and everything. So he asked me to come along. So Cindy and I really didn't know each other very well, but so we say our first date was a blind date. The first date that I ever spent any money on her, I took her to the state Ducks Unlimited convention. So, and we went muskie fishing on our honeymoon, and she won Fisherman of the Week. So, so it was a match made in heaven, you might say. And so 35 years later, we're still going.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, my husband's from Massachusetts. I don't think he really realized what he was getting into, but he's in now. So,
and we have 4 grandchildren they're all legacy green wings at 4 different marshes in the state of Iowa. So
yeah, that's amazing.
My youngest grandson, or my oldest grandson, I should say, he was born in close proximity to our annual dinner, the Arrowhead chapter of DU in Des Moines. So we signed him up as a green wing when he was 18 hours old, and he won the gun that day.
Oh, that's amazing.
So anyhow, we're
I get it.
Dyed in the wool.
Yeah, my middle son, my dad was state chairman of Mississippi and has been a long time volunteer, and he had a green wing project dedicated to him. Wow. And at the time, my son was in my belly, so he was not born yet. He had no name. We didn't know when he was going to get here. At the time, I think we might have known he was a boy. I can't even remember, but he's on there as baby Burke.
But he was there.
Yeah, he was there. He's on there, but he doesn't have his name on there. But yeah, so I get it. And I think I was the first legacy green wing in Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
Because my dad started the project.
Okay.
So yeah, and my siblings were too old to be legacy green wings anymore, so.
What a wonderful project.
Oh yeah, it is. It's a great project. And the Green Wing Project in general has been a great project, and I enjoyed it as a kid and did a lot with it. So yeah, I'm glad that you have grandkids to share.
Yeah.
Do they all hunt? Do your grandkids?
They don't all hunt. It's 2 boys and 2 girls.
Oh, yeah.
The oldest one, it seems like once you start going down the line, they really get involved in sports and activities. And
they might come back.
Man, it's just hard to find. But the oldest one is a hunter, and he's harvested several different types of game and so forth. But
and they might come around. They might not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're interested because I guess DU has a new initiative now with
the trap.
Water education.
Oh, okay.
It's a brand new thing that they're going to start in Iowa, at least, with the schools. And my daughter is a superintendent or is a principal at a school, K through 12 school, and she's already in talks with our state chairman and so forth about starting that in their rural school.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say trap programs, because that's a new thing that's gotten really popular in high schools and middle schools around here. You can, as a sport, you can do trap, and we've gotten really involved in that.
Yes. So, we're starting to get that more and more around Iowa. So
yeah, it's good for college scholarships. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. Apparently there's money there. So just so you know out there, people. Anyway, so it's really interesting. I don't want to harp on it about how you said about your dad passing away and how that drove you back into the outdoors. I can't imagine, but I would think I could understand that in a way, like how it would be a way to reconnect, which is an interesting way to think about it. Like you can kind of hold on to that connection in a way by sharing that, even though you're still.
It created a focus.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I liked hearing that, because it's something that I still share with my father today, and I'm lucky we have that, because it's something we'll always have, and we get to share that connection, and we share that passion for the outdoors. And even if it's not with us hunting, just being in the outdoors and caring about this resource we have. Let's go into collecting a little bit. So when did you first learn that there were even things to collect, and how did you get introduced into that?
Well, our family has always been interested in family history and the things that go along with family history, the primitives. And our kitchen, for instance, is just full of family primitives, things that we can say this was grandma's, this was great-grandma's, this was so-and-so's. And so those, so early on when I got it out of college and had maybe a little bit of money, a disposable income, really like going to antique shows and things like that. And every once in a while you would see a decoy at these shows. I had no idea what they were or anything like that, but my first Evans decoy that I ever collected, I didn't even know it was an Evans. It was at an antique show. It was sitting on top of a cupboard or something, and it was in profile. And that was from across the room. I saw that decoy, and it just drew me to it because of its profile. And any collector could probably say that about Mason or Dodge or New Jersey or whatever. Mm-hmm. But with these Evans decoys, the profile are really interesting. And
what was it?
Well, it turned out it was. I didn't even really know what it was because it was a competitive. And we can get into the grades here later, but it was a competitive hen bluebill.
Okay.
And they're kind of drab.
Yep, they are.
But the profile was what socked me. So I bought it. It was like, I don't know, $60 or something. It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the interesting story is probably 20 years later or 15 years later, I took it I really started noticing Evans. And people had them and recognized them as Evans from Ladysmith, Wisconsin, and so forth. So I took it to the Minnesota Decoy Show, and there was a gentleman there by the name of Rube Neitzel. He had Evans decoys, and he had the Mammoth Evans decoys, which are a lot like the Premier Masons. Really nice paint and everything else. And I pulled this decoy that I had bought, this lowly competitive gray drab bluebill out, and he just went nuts over this bird. He says, young man, do you know what you have there? And I said, no. I just knew I wanted that big Mammoth Evans that he had on his table. And he says, you have a competitive hen bluebill. He said, would you like to sell it? I said, well, I don't know. Well, how would you like to trade for one of these that I've got here? So we made a deal, and Rube put that in his collection. And I had the new bluebill, the Mammoth. Everybody was happy. And quite a few years later, unfortunately, Rube had come down with cancer, terminal cancer. And came the time that he brought his birds back to that Minnesota show to sell. Wow. And he brought that bird back to me. And he said, John, he says, if you would like to have this bird, I brought it for you. And so make a long story short, every time I see that bird, I think of Rube. Yeah. And the journey that bird made. So that was one of the very first birds that I ever bought. Yeah. You know? And it turned out to be an Evans.
Where did you buy? Where was the antique show?
In Des Moines.
In Des Moines.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it made it down to Des Moines. And that's interesting about factory decoys, that they tend to travel a little farther than the other the carved decoys and stuff. You seem to find them all over the place. Yeah. Yeah, that's something I always try when you talk about Rube, that community is so important with decoy collecting, especially for new collectors coming in. Like those connections you make just so he can tell you what you have, for one, that you didn't know. Also that you can see that he had all those other Evans out, so you can look at all those Evans to see what you might be looking for. Like, I don't think, especially with the internet and stuff, like you just don't get that kind of experience that you really need to have as a new collector. Can you kind of speak on, for you, what your experience was coming into this collecting hobby and what those connections, like how important they were and how they affected what you did from then on?
Well, it's still true today. You want to orient yourself next to some great collectors, people that are really passionate and interested in what they're collecting, who you can trust. Obviously, in any atmosphere, you may have some sketchy, but for the 99% of the people, the decoy collectors that I know, they're very trustworthy, and most of them are very eager to share information with you. And they also need to be honest and say, I don't think you want that bird because of this and this and this, or man, that's a great bird. I wish I could have that bird, but it's your bird, you found it, and so forth. I had a great friend of mine that, reason we're here in Memphis now, Terry Smart, his collection is in the Waterfowl Heritage Museum at the Pyramid. He gave me a great bit of advice one time. He said, John, he says, never let a decoy come between friends. And in the 40 years that I've been collecting decoys, it's kind of come to a head a couple of times, and I've had to step back and say, it's just a bird. It's really not worth, causing a ruckus over.
Right.
So, that's pretty poignant, I think. Yeah, never let a bird come between friends. And you could probably make that for about anything in life, I suppose.
Yes, probably
but
so.
Jealousy, jealousy or eagerness to have something that somebody else doesn't have, that's kind of takes over once in a while, or tries to take over.
Yeah.
But orient yourself to honest, knowledgeable, passionate collectors, and you'll do fine. And handle as many birds. All the experts will tell you, handle as many birds as you can. Pick them up, handle them, ask questions about them. That's the way you learn. Just the way a bird dog learns how to retrieve. The more birds, the better.
Yeah. So go to shows.
Go to shows, absolutely.
We talked a little bit about Evans decoys, and I have a couple questions about Evans. But before we get into my questions, can you tell us? Everyone's familiar with Mason, for the most part, familiar with Mason decoys. Can you say what Evans decoys are and kind of give the audience who maybe doesn't know what we're talking about just kind of a basic?
Well, a little history. Walter Evans started his decoy company in 1928 in Ladysmith, Wisconsin. He had been a millwright for lumber mills, local lumber mills, and in 1927 he had a terrible fall off of a scaffolding, and it really crippled him up bad for a period of time. And he was out of a job, so he needed something to do. And being a millwright, he knew machinery, he knew lathes and that kind of thing. At the time, again, this is 1928 when he was starting out. In 1924, Mason went out of business. So there was a void in the world of hunting decoys at that particular point, a void of good quality, nice paint, nice big birds, all that kind of thing. So somehow or another, Walter recognized that need and decided to put it to work for him. The Evans Mammoth grade is the best grade that he made. It was a big bird. It had carving. It had sanding from a belt sander on the top of the mandible, almost identical to the Mason Premier, which was the best bird that Mason made. The paint wasn't quite the same, but it was still upgraded paint and all that kind of thing. So early in the collectors, I haven't heard it for a while in the world of collectors at the shows and things, but they used to refer to Evans, were kind of looked down on. They were called the poor man's Mason.
Right. Yeah. I have a question about that later, but we'll keep going.
So anyhow, that was where that transition happened, and for me, it was lucky that Walter was able to, number one, recuperate from his fall. Yeah. Number two, and have the resources to do this. Again, the USA Great Depression is normally thought of from 1929 to 1941.
But it started much earlier than that.
Yeah, it just didn't all of a sudden one day just happen.
Right.
The economists normally say 29. For 1924, for Mason to go out of business, 1928 for Evans to go into business, it was pretty close to hard times. To give you an example, and this is actually a little bit, it amazed me that he charged so much there was 3 grades, Mammoth, Standard, and Competitive grade being the lowest of workmanship and paint and everything else. He got $10 a dozen for the competitives.
Really? Yeah, that's
he got $25 a dozen for the mammoths that were hollow, for instance.
Yeah, so he was in production for about 5 years, right?
About 6 years, and maybe you could say even his son-in-law took over.
Do you think his short time period is because of the depression, or why do you think?
I think it was basically because of his health.
His health? Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure being around all that noise, we had a show where somebody had the Evans lathe, and they stuck, and they had the they had the templates and everything else for the heads and for the bodies. And they said you could have heard that. You could be inside of a building a block away and could hear that lathe.
I can't imagine breathing in all that dust either.
And all the cedar dust finally got him.
Yeah.
So he didn't die till 1941, I believe it was. But his health was not good.
So how old was he when he started? He had been older.
I don't know that. I could figure it out, I guess. But he
couldn't have been too young.
He'd spent several years in the lumber mills in northern Wisconsin before that. So he was at least middle aged, I'm guessing. Yeah.
And then it goes on to his son-in-law for a brief period of time, and that doesn't last long.
Yeah, a year.
Yeah.
Cloyd Ellingbo, he was the village undertaker.
So can you tell the difference between his birds and the other birds?
You can.
You can. So how would you tell the difference between
they look like Evans, speculums and that kind of thing. They're just clunkier.
They're just clunkier.
Yeah. Is that a word?
Okay. Yeah. No, I get it. So do you mean like clunky as in like has not as good a form or like or heavier,
blockier?
Okay.
I don't think he made any hollow birds.
Okay.
They were just more blocky and the paint wasn't as refined. Walter had he started out just himself and another guy early on, and then he hired a few ladies in town. One lady is described as a housekeeper, a housewife. But I'm reminded when I look at the speculums and things on these Evans birds, I don't remember what toll painting was a fad 20 years ago, and a lot of especially the women were good at it. They just make rolls with their brush, and they could make all kinds of petals and things like that. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm reminded that it's like toll painting. It looks like maybe the base of the speculums are just one roll with the brush, and I can visualize some lady doing that, you know.
And women have a history of painting decoys in general. So
yeah.
Well, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. So he had very little help, but he, they were just the local people in little Ladysmith. Yeah. Yeah.
And so what did he sell through? So we know like Mason sold through like Sears and Roebuck and all that. But
he had, and there's also some thoughts about a hardware store decoy that was made differently, but he sold a lot of decoys that were just regulars too in Chicago, especially Abercrombie and Fitch and VL&A, for instance, were big hardware outfits then. Morley Murphy was a big hardware outfit out of Green Bay.
Okay.
And we found a history of an order from Morley Murphy for 225 dozen.
That's a lot of decoys.
That's a lot of decoys, yeah. Especially during the Depression.
And wooden decoys,
But there was a real void, for them. And of course, Green Bay's a mecca for diver hunting and so forth. So.
Right, and I mean those camps were still in operation, so they would have needed decoys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's other rumors of a large order like that, 150 dozen mammoth pintails for a big hunting club in Texas. None of those birds that anybody knows has ever surfaced. We're always on the lookout for them, but he got a lot of orders for birds, and I'm guessing because of the quality.
Yeah.
And probably the price, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. So one is, when does the Evans Decoy Collector Association, what do y'all say? Decoys a Collector Association? What's your title?
The Evans Society.
The Evans Society. Yeah. I always get all of y'all's mixed up. So the Evans Society, when does that start? And how many are y'all now?
Well, it still is an informal group of people that are interested, men and women both, that are interested in talking about Evans. There's so many facets of the Evans company as far as the decoys, different things and eccentricities and all kinds of things. So we meet. It probably started, maybe the Evans Society loosely started 30 years ago, or maybe more, of just two or three guys getting together and talking about bringing some birds to the table and just passing them around and and so forth. Now we meet at 3 different shows. We meet at the Minnesota Decoy Show. We meet at the Oshkosh Show.
Yeah,
and
naturally.
And we also meet at the National in Chicago.
Okay.
And it's usually on a Wednesday or a Thursday evening at 8 o'clock or whenever, and everybody gets together. We like to have everybody to bring a bird that's interested. They can bring 2 or 3 birds if they want to. Maybe something interesting about that bird, maybe something that's a one-off about that bird, or just something to bring to brag about.
So have you ever found anything? Has anything really cool ever showed up at those shows?
Yeah, we've had a lot of really neat birds show up over the years. The thing that I really like about the Evans decoys and the Evans Society helps make that happen is the discussions about the uniqueness of things. It's easy to read in. In other words, you could have a bird that's a one-off. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to try to make up some kind of story in your mind about, why is that a one-off? They did this on purpose and so forth. This was during we have to bring ourselves back and remind us that this was during the Depression.
Yeah.
They had orders, 225 dozen of a decoy they have to get out, and all of a sudden they ran out of red eyes.
Right.
Or they ran out of sanded heads or sanded bodies. So what are you going to do? Are you going to stop production, or are you just going to slap them together as best you can and get the dang order out the door?
Right.
So, there's several different schools of thoughts. There's some things that are a little bit strange.
And some of them, just could have been a miss, like in production line, like, we just quality controlled it and
absolutely.
Set it. Yeah.
Some of the, on the mammoths, for instance, they didn't have all the lines and things on the speculum. Somebody just forgot. Yeah. Ran out of time or whatever. They said, "Oh, what the heck?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh. Nobody ever thought of that at that time as being a collector item.
Yeah, I don't think they were thinking about anybody collecting them. So is anything in those come up that has changed, like a general thought that they all had before, and that it's like anything changed what you thought?
Yeah, over a period of years, sometimes the thoughts kind of change a little bit. I right at this moment, I guess I can't think of a specific. A strange thing about Evans on the redheads in the natural world, a redhead duck has yellow eyes.
Right. But
99.9% of all the Evans redheads have red eyes.
Yeah.
So, it's been speculated for years, why does Walter Evans have red eyes in his redheads? They're thinking, maybe he never saw a redhead, and that's just the way it was, and they just kept going. Once in a while, somebody will come up with a redhead, especially a hen redhead, that has yellow eyes. Well, hen redheads and hen bluebills are very, very close, even in the real world.
Yeah.
So with a wooden counterfeit decoy, maybe it was really a bluebill. You really don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but those things are really interesting.
Because canvasbacks doesn't have red eyes, though, even though canvasbacks have red eyes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he has yellow eyes on the canvasbacks.
No, he's got red eyes.
He's got red eyes
on his canvasbacks.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I couldn't remember. Yeah, I knew it was something funny like that. So my other question going forward, since you've been collecting Evans for so long, what is your thoughts about this, in the last few years, this resurgence of Evans and how the prices are going up? Why do you think that is? Do you just think more people are getting interested in it? Why do you think all of a sudden the popularity for Evans is?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to Terry and Andy's book. Yeah. Evans Decoy. We'd been needing a book for decades, and I think there was finally enough interest in a couple of guys that finally decided to put the effort out. And had the collections and the network to support photographs and research and so forth and so on. So it's a pretty comprehensive book. Andy Shonich and Terry Smart put this book out. Shonich.
I've been saying that wrong for a long time. Okay.
Andy Shonich. So Evans Decoys, Evans Duck Decoy Factory, the reference guide. So many, many, many photographs, really nice photographs and so forth, and some nice information. And they show shipping labels and all kinds of different things, even though the factory was only in business for roughly 6 years.
Yeah.
He put out a great number of decoys.
I wonder how many he was making a day.
You know, this is really strange because we have sat around, and once in a while maybe somebody's had a couple too many drinks and they decide that we should try to count how many decoys that we think that he probably did based upon the collections that are out there and so forth. You'd never get to that number.
I'm sure the math comes out different every time.
Yeah.
But even you have to be curious on how many he made a day, because that's a large.
They had duplicating lathes, I think, that would do, maybe a half dozen at a time.
Right.
Yeah. This is a one-on-one deal. So, and they had to use the same lathe for the heads and for the bodies.
Yeah.
So he
was using the same.
They'd make a bunch of heads, and then they'd make a bunch of bodies, and then they'd shave them down, and then they'd sand them and paint them, and
yeah.
So
how many was Mason doing? Was he still doing one-on-one, or?
I guess I can't tell you that.
I don't know.
I don't know about that.
I don't know at the end.
Early on, I don't know if they had multiple output decoy lathes or not. In the 20s and the 10s.
Yeah, I don't know if they did. He might at the end, but I'm not sure, because he gets his from Dodge, and then Well, Peterson, then Dodge.
Yeah,
they just
real progression there.
Yeah, there's a progression there. So I don't know exactly how many they could, but it wasn't that many, and their paint was so complicated. So,
yes.
That they weren't putting out a whole lot.
Yeah.
Well, this is a good spot for our break. Let's just take a couple minutes, and we'll be right back. So, is there anything that I haven't asked about Evans that you would like to tell our listeners about?
Yeah, there's probably a few things. There was 3 grades of the Evans. He made a mammoth, he made a standard, and what they call a competitive grade. And each one the mammoth was the largest, came in a hollow and a 2-piece hollow, which meant it was sliced longitudinally through the bird, and then each half was hollowed out. Those were the most expensive at $25 a dozen, and he also made solid mammoths. The standards, he offered those in hollow as well as solid, although those were tube hollow. So in other words, in the breast, he would bore a hole. On the bigger birds, it was 1 inch and 9/16 hole, and on the teal, it was 1 inch and 3/8 hole. And he'd drill the hole longitudinally through the breast towards the tail, and that made him a little more buoyant and a little bit lighter, and so forth. And some of the things that come out of the Evans Society, we were talking about the Evans Society. One of the speculations was that Walter was a really frugal guy, and he was known for not using dry wood, dry cedar. So consequently, Evans decoys are notorious for cracks. And one thought about the standard grade making them tube hollow was most of the cracks culminated at the breast, or maybe they even started at the breast. And once he bored that hole in the breast, it stopped the crack. And then he bored the hole, and then they plugged that hole, and then sanded it and primed it and painted it and so forth and so on. So on many of the hollowed standard grades, you don't even see a hole.
Right, yeah.
But if the paint's worn, you can see that hole and you can measure it and so forth. So, but the crack always stops at that. So maybe that was useful, maybe it wasn't. And then they made a competitive grade, which was just a basic paint, if hardly any paint at all, and it was solid.
Unsanded,
both head and body. So it was very minimal effort. Some of the later decoy companies called that the feather finish. They thought the ducks, that roughness, they thought it was
feathers.
Feathers, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was just no.
But going back on to Walter being a frugal man, he was notorious for his wood. He didn't invest in a kiln, or he didn't invest in dried blanks. So the splits were common, and in many cases, and it's really common to find on an Evans decoy, where they have fixed the split. and and he did that a couple different ways. He would take a split, and he would take a piece of wood and put it into that split, and then use a corrugated fastener, which was like a flat piece of metal that's corrugated, and you see it a lot in the old window frames in the corners. That's how they keep the corners together, is drive that corrugated fastener or corrugated nail in there. And there's a lot of these that have what we refer to as a Dutchman.
Right.
And a Dutchman is Walter Evans's fix for split decoys. He was also
so was he fixing those splits before he sent them out, or are they coming back? No.
They fixed those before they fixed them, and then they sanded them, primed them. In many cases, you don't see the corrugation, but over the years, the corrugated nails. But over the years, as the paint gets wet and dries and so forth and so on, the paint might fall off at that.
Okay.
In some cases, we see where that big clunky lathe knocked big hunks out of the side of the decoy. Maybe 50-cent size pieces, and it's fairly common to see a piece of wood put back in there with a couple of brads holding it to the rest of the decoy, and sanded, primed, painted, so forth.
Yeah, so he wasn't throwing anything away.
No, we still call that a Dutchman. But he must have used some really cheap brown paint, because most of his birds that have brown, the hens, for instance, it's really hard to find a hen Evans that's in pristine brown paint. And so one of the neatest things that we've talked about in the Evans Society is, why do we have decoys, for instance, hen decoys, as an example, that have really crappy brown paint on them, and you turn them over and there's a fresh-looking Evans decoy stamp on the bottom.
Okay. And
the stamp was the part that was in the water and out of the water and dry and so forth and so on. At some point, somebody said, there's always copycats and so forth that might have it's easy to make a stamp and put a stamp on there, but a lot of these that you see, they have a dark stamp and maybe a crappy paint. Well, it just so happens that in the small town of Ladysmith, he must have been friends with either the postmaster or one of the people in the Ladysmith post office, and I'm going to use air quotes with my fingers, he borrowed the ink from the Ladysmith post office to use in his stamp pad.
Huh.
And of course, the U.S. government uses nothing but the best, at that time, the best Indy ink that you could find. So the ink survived all the graft that a decoy takes, but whereas maybe the paint didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it is crappy brown paint.
Yeah.
He didn't, and it's not even a good color brown.
Yeah, a lot of it fell off and so forth. But yeah, just little, those are the kind of idiosyncrasies and different irregularities that really interest me.
Yeah. In
the world of collecting, it's not always about the decoy, but it's about those kind of things and the people that we meet along the way. And, network with.
Right, and the stories of how those collectors made their decisions on what they decided to do is just as interesting as what the object was made for.
Yes.
And you can talk about that with a lot of makers. So what else do you collect, and why did it drive you to move on? So did you start collecting with Evans and then move from there? Or how did your collecting evolve?
Well, I really liked, probably because I could afford them when I was younger, the factory decoys. Mm-hmm. So the animal traps and the Pascagoula birds and the Jeff City birds and so forth. I really liked the factory birds. But then I collect some Illinois river birds and so forth.
Hold on, before we go any farther, because I think this has never actually been explained to our listeners, but what is the difference between a factory bird that we're referring to versus like a carved bird versus like what we get out of factories?
Well, basically a bird that has been turned on a lathe.
Okay.
And either finished or not finished versus a hand carver that carves the birds by hand with a spoke shave or with a knife or whatever. Yeah.
I just want to clarify it real quick, just in case people are confused.
And there's a true distinction between those.
Yes.
And there's some people that collect only factory birds. There's some people that collect only hand-carved birds. And there's a lot of us that collect both, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the factory birds were really where I got started, and Evans was part of those factory birds. I started really getting interested in Evans, and of course the shows that we go to mostly are in the north. So there's a lot of Evans to be found up there, and a lot of other Evans collectors there. So I just naturally, I think, gravitated. Plus, I liked the form. Naturally gravitated to Evans. I've got about 60 or so Evans in my collection. There's people that's got a lot more than that, but I try to collect nice birds, really nice birds and so forth. And then Illinois River, those are all hand carved birds. Recently, within the last 5 years or so, I got really interested in Jack Musgrove. He was a carver in Iowa, lived in Des Moines, curator of the Iowa Historical Museum for 40 years, carved in 6 decades, and was competitor in decoy carving contests in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s with some of the world-known carvers, both dead and alive. So I was fortunate enough to write an article for Decoy magazine. It happened to be a cover story article on Jack Musgrove. So a friend, I ran into a gentleman that was it's all in this article, but I ran into a gentleman that was a young guy when he happened to meet Jack Musgrove in the marsh, and they were killing all the birds over the Musgrove birds, and this young kid couldn't get a bird within range. So he went over to talk to Jack, and uncharacteristic, Jack kind of took him under his wing and taught him how to carve and so forth. So Jack had bequeathed before he died in 1980. His wife bequeathed these decoys that he had left in gunny sacks underneath in the basement for many, many years. They're all hand carved beautifully. Some of them are contest winners. Some of them are in the Iowa Historical Museum now on display and in the archives. So we were fortunate enough to have about 60 decoys come to market. And first thing we did was write an article. I wrote the article on Jack Musgrove. Some beautiful decoys. So I collect. Consequently, I collect Jack Musgrove decoys along with other people as well.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
And the interesting thing about him was that whatever he killed, he carved.
Really?
So there's a mallard pintail hybrid, for instance, that he killed. There's a Eurasian widgeon.
Where's he getting this Eurasian widgeon in Iowa?
It happened to be a transient.
Okay.
So they killed one and decided that it had to be in the spread. So the next year that bird was in the spread. He first put it in the contest, put it in a national decoy contest somewhere, Burlington, or he entered contests as far away as New York at the National Sportsman Show and things like that, Chicago.
So he did working and decorative. Did he do decorative decoys as well?
Later on, he did a few decoratives.
Okay.
But most everything was a working decoy, even if it was a blue ribbon winner in a national contest.
Okay.
It went in the spread.
It went in the spread.
Yep.
Yeah, that's crazy that he then hunted over.
And he didn't sell any decoys except one time. He sold to George Herder.
Okay.
And there's a model of Herder's plastic decoys that are modeled after Jack Musgrove's wooden birds that he carved for him.
So if he wasn't selling any, what's his production? Like, how many do you think he produced?
Well, best as we can think, he carved maybe 150 decoys in his career.
Oh, wow. That's not many.
Not many, yeah.
No, that's amazing. Was he making a living this way, or was he?
No.
Yeah, what was he doing to make a living during this?
He was the curator for the Iowa Historical Museum.
Okay. Well, that's really cool.
Yeah. And he was a master taxidermist and all kinds of things.
So where do you think his influence came from?
Well, we don't know.
Yeah, because it's hard to tell.
We do know that he competed against, like I said, some some of the national carvers back in the day.
Right. Yeah. So maybe he was getting influenced while he was at the shows and stuff.
I think it probably went both ways.
Probably, yeah.
Jack was pretty innovative with inserts and that kind of thing, raised primaries and so forth in his hunting decoys. In fact, he was chastised at one of the national shows because he had raised primaries on a hunting decoy. But they still hunted with them. And I've got a beautiful goose that one of the primaries you can tell has been knocked off and glued back on, but it's got shot holes in it and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very unique for a carver.
Yeah. He was highly innovative with different things. So we really like the form of him. And there's several of us Musgrove collectors around that have some fantastic, they're fantastic birds. But the neatest part about it is 99% of them are were part of his stool.
Right, that he hunted over these birds. Yeah, so that's very unusual because that you would get, which is kind of neat that you get to hunt. Well, you're not hunting over them, but you have the birds that he shot birds over.
Yeah.
So a long tail. Did he shoot that?
Shot it. All these birds were killed in Iowa.
Some of these are a little surprising.
Yeah, old squaw.
So I'm looking at his magazine article with the decoys in it. Yeah, that old squaw is a little.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, he's far from home.
Yeah, anything Barrow's goldeneye.
Yeah,
Eurasian widgeon, all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, some of these you can be like, all right, okay.
Yeah.
But the Eurasian widgeon and the old squaw in Iowa is a little surprising.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was a liar.
They happen.
Yeah. I like this and the tip up too. Did he have many tip ups or just one?
He had, that I know of, he had 3 or 4 tip ups and some, and I include in that headless birds as well.
Yeah.
That looked like they were feeding. Yeah.
These feeding birds.
Like I said, he was really innovative.
Yeah, I'm learning about him. I didn't really know much about Jack Musgrove. This is all new to me. So before we end, is there anything else you would like to mention to our audience?
Well, if you have a chance to get into, if you have any interest at all in decoys and you have a chance, go to a show.
That was going to be my next question. My one question I always like to ask is if you have any advice for new collectors or people interested.
Just handle as many birds as you can. Ask as many collectors. You'll cultivate some wonderful friendships. There's lots of times that Cindy and I go to shows not expecting to buy a decoy.
Yeah.
We usually do. But we're there to see the friends and talk about things, and we almost learn something every time.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite decoy?
I can't. It's like picking out a favorite grandkid.
It's like your favorite kid. Do you have your most interesting find?
These Musgrove decoys that I happened to find this guy and become friends with Barry Kinney, and he had these 60 Musgrove decoys in his basement underneath the stairs.
That is pretty crazy.
I mean, it was like a Christmas for a year.
Yeah.
Learning something new every day about them and seeing these things. The most important thing in my life or in my mind, is fresh to the market.
Yeah.
And you see that term at auctions and things. I mean, anytime you can have a decoy that hasn't been in somebody else's hands, another collector's hands, it's really a special thing.
It is. Yeah, and it's rare. It's very rare.
It is rare. Yeah. As we age and age out and die and all kinds of things, they keep making the circulation. But fresh to market is really exuberating.
Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the show. This is fun.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, Katie. This is fun. Thanks again to our special guest, John Munson. Thanks to our producer, Chris Isaac. And thanks to you, our listeners, for supporting wetlands and waterfowl conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks. Stay tuned to the Ducks.